My chest tightened as I stepped inside. Then I saw him. Hyung-woo was lying on the floor, motionless, his wrist bleeding. A fresh, deep cut. My breath caught. I dropped to my knees, grabbing his hand. His skin was burning, feverish. Too hot. My hands trembled as I cupped his face. Hyung, wake up. No response. Behind me, Jisoo clutched my arm, his voice shaking. What do we do? My heart pounded. There was no time to hesitate. We pulled him onto the bed. Jisoo ran to grab the first aid kit, his fingers fumbling as he applied antiseptic and wrapped Hyung-woo's wrist. I pressed my palm to his forehead. He was burning up. We need to take him to the hospital, I said. Turning to Jisoo, we moved to lift Hyung-woo, but his eyes barely cracked open. His fevered gaze locked onto mine for the briefest second. His lips parted, a whisper slipping out. Don't! Take me to the hospital. I stiffened. What? I don't want anyone to see me like this. My jaw clenched. Are you insane? You need a doctor. Hyung-woo exhaled weakly. Please, Jisoo, don't tell Mom and Dad. Jisoo sobbed, gripping his brother's hand. Hyung, you're burning up. Let's just go to the hospital. Leave me alone, Hyung-woo mumbled. His voice was fragile, tired, so I stayed. I sat beside his bed, watching over him, waiting, but he refused everything. Food, medicine, he just lay there, burning up, staring at nothing. That's when I lost it. Stop acting like a damn child, Hyung-woo. My voice came out harsher than I intended. His tired eyes finally met mine. Minho. His voice was weak, barely holding on. But I didn't stop. You think you're the only one hurting. My hands curled into fists. Jisoo hasn't eaten since yesterday. He's sick with worry about you. But you don't care, do you? Hyung-woo blinked, his eyes filling with tears. Minho. His voice cracked. Don't blame me. I clenched my fists. Then give me a reason not to. Hyung-woo didn't answer, but I saw tears in his eyes. I had no courage to push for more words. So I turned away. Jisoo was watching from the doorway, quiet and exhausted. I forced my voice to steady. Jisoo, wait here. I'll make something for you to eat. I made porridge for Hyung-woo and a bowl of noodles for Jisoo. But Jisoo barely ate. I forced him to get some sleep, making sure he was settled before I carried the tray into Hyung-woo's room. He was still lying in bed, his breathing shallow. I sat on the edge, placing the bowl in front of him. Hyung, eat this. My voice came out softer than I expected. Hyung-woo barely turned his head. I can't. My patience snapped. The bowl slammed onto the bedside table with a sharp clack. What's wrong with you? The words spilled out before I could stop them. You think hurting yourself will fix anything. You think throwing yourself away is the answer. Hyung-woo barely reacted. His eyelids fluttered open, just enough for me to see the hollowness inside. His voice was weak, almost lifeless. Why do you care? My chest ached, but my lips moved before my brain could catch up. Because you're my best friend's brother. Hyung-woo let out a shaky breath. His gaze was heavy when it met mine. Say it. I frowned. Say what? His voice barely rose above a whisper. Minho, please. Say you don't hate me. Silence. I looked away, my jaw clenching. I grabbed the bowl again and pushed it into his hands. Eat first. Take your medicine. Then we'll talk. His face twisted. Minho, I'm sorry. I said nothing. I sat beside him, pressing the warm bowl against his fingers. Eat. Just a little. Hyung-woo hesitated, then took small, slow bites. When he was done, I rummaged through the cupboard, grabbing the medicine he had prescribed himself. Just take it. His eyes flickered to mine before he finally sighed and swallowed the medicine. Slowly, his body relaxed, and within minutes he was asleep. I let out a slow breath, reaching for his phone. I plugged it into the charger. The moment it powered on, a call came through. The contact name wasn't saved, just 2 black hearts. My stomach twisted as I tapped the screen. 100 missed calls. Who the hell was this? I set the phone down, turning back to Hyungwoo. His forehead was still burning. I reached for a damp cloth and wiped his face gently. Then I stood to leave. But I heard it. "Minho, don't hate me, don't leave me." I froze. His voice was barely audible, but it felt like a scream inside my chest. Without thinking, my fingers curled around his hand. A single tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I turned slightly, watching his face. Then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in and pressed the faintest kiss to his forehead. I should leave, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself lying beside him on the bed. I wanted to ignore him. I wanted to pretend he didn't affect me. But then why couldn't I stop caring? Morning arrived, and I prepared the breakfast. Ji-soo was still asleep. When I stepped into Hyungwoo's room, I found him awake, though barely. He was lying against the pillows, face pale, eyes unfocused. His fingers hovered over his phone, typing something quickly before setting it down, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang. A delivery. I opened the door, and the courier held out a bouquet of red roses. "For Hyungwoo," the guy said, handing them over. I just stared. Roses? For him? I flipped over the tiny card attached, and my stomach twisted at the words. "Get well soon, babe." Babe. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Seriously, I walked straight into Hyungwoo's room. He looked up as I tossed the flowers onto the bed. "Here," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your lover sent you a gift." "Sweet, huh?" Hyungwoo blinked, then frowned. His fingers trembled as they reached for the bouquet. "You enjoy mocking me, don't you?" he murmured. I scoffed. "I don't. I'm just stating facts." His jaw tensed. His grip on the bouquet tightened until his knuckles went white. For a second, I thought he was going to snap back, throw something at me, tell me to get the hell out. But instead, his voice softened into something raw, something almost desperate. "Can't you stop hating me?" I felt it then, a sharp, unexpected twist in my chest. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything. But when he looked up at me, his eyes clouded, his lips trembling, I forced out a breath, my voice quieter than before. "Forget what I said that day, Hyung. Why should I hate you?" Hyungwoo let out a quiet, bitter chuckle. "Is that all?" He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he plucked a single rose from the bouquet and, without hesitation, tore a petal off. The crimson petal fluttered to the floor. Then another, and another. I stood there, frozen as he kept going. The petals scattered across the bed, the sheets, the floor, until nothing remained but the empty stem in his hand. Then, just as suddenly, he tossed it aside and pulled the black blanket over his head. And I heard it, the shaky inhale, the muffled sound of his breathing hitching, a quiet sniffle, then another. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward and sat down on the edge of the bed, my hand hovering over the blanket before resting on top of it. I didn't pull it away. I just sat there. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, after what felt like forever, I exhaled sharply and muttered, "So, whose babe are you anyway?" The blanket shifted slightly. No answer. I clicked my tongue, waving the tiny note in the air. "Give me the number. I'll let that person know you're too busy crying under a blanket." There was a tiny shuffle, then a hoarse voice, barely above a whisper. "Shut up, Minho." I smirked despite myself. "Oh, so you are alive." But he didn't pull the blanket down, didn't snap back like he usually would. His voice was weaker this time. "Just leave me alone." My smirk disappeared. "I can't do that." The blanket stilled. He didn't move, didn't say anything, but I knew he'd heard me, so I kept going. Look, if you want to cry, cry. If you want to be pissed at the world, fine. But don't think for a second that I'm just gonna walk away. My voice softened. You're not alone, Hyungwoo. Then slowly, hesitantly, the blanket shifted. Then, finally, his tired, red-rimmed eyes met mine. Before I could stop myself, I reached forward and pulled him into a hug. Then I felt it. The silent cry he refused to voice. The way his fingers curled weakly into my shirt. The warmth of his tears soaking into the fabric. I closed my eyes. I wanted to say it. I love you, Hyung. I wanted to scream it. But instead, I just held him tighter. Because, for now, this was enough.
I'll find you against the